Weakness and inactivity in your gluteal muscles is a major factor that can limit your well-being, especially as we get older, not to mention if we've got lower back pain. In today's video, we're covering one amazing exercise that will help you activate your glutes and build strength for the long term. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Michael Fatika, the lead osteopath and spine specialist here at Back in Shape, and we help people all over the UK and around the world fix their back pain and get back in shape for the long term. And in today's tutorial, we'll be showing you how you can perform the bridge exercise to safely activate your glutes and build strength in the muscles, no matter where you're starting out from. Before we get into it, there'll be timestamps underneath here. So if you're not sure what your starting point is, check them out and then fast forward to the relevant part of the video. Now let's get into the demonstration. So how are we going to do the glute bridge? We're going to start by lying on the floor, like so, knees bent, feet on the floor, holding onto your core. The reason we have our hands here when you're starting this out is so we can engage the core and feel it with our hands and the muscles themselves. We're going to then engage our back muscles, so pop our chest out so we're nice and strong in this section of the body and that doesn't move. And then all we're going to think about doing is pressing our feet into the ground to lift our hips off the ground. And we're driving with our glutes as we do this, like so. And then we come back down nice and slow. Kiss your skin or your clothes on the floor. Don't rest completely. And then come back up again. Down and back up. 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 The whole time you're doing this, your spine should be nice and stiff, held steady. Only real joint that's moving is your hip joint moving into extension, driving from the glutes. The hamstrings you might feel a little bit as well as you're doing this, and keeping control through a nice slow pace. So when you're doing this exercise, try and aim for 10 good reps, but you might feel that you need to rest. Maybe you lost a bit of engagement, you started moving your spine in one way or other, which we'll get to later, and you need to just pause for a moment, re-engage your muscles of the back and muscles of the core, and then initiate the reps. Aiming for 3 to 5 sets of those 10 reps, taking a little bit of rest in between, maybe 30 seconds, just to recalibrate yourself and get ready for the next good set. One of the big mistakes that people make when they do the glute bridge of any form is that they're taught to do a pelvic tuck. Now, this might come from previous yoga practice, it might come from previous Pilates lessons, or other instruction in the past. And the reason this is improper is because it's teaching you a movement that fundamentally destabilizes your spine and is not practical for day-to-day life. We shouldn't be pelvic tucking when we're doing these movements. We're trying to build and maintain strength, maintaining a neutral spine. And what this might look like the wrong way is to tuck your pelvis to the flat to the ground and then lift up. And this does have merit in some places. But if you're trying to build a healthy, strong back, learning this movement means that when you stand up, you're also going to have to do this movement before you do any particular activities. So eliminate the pelvic tuck for the longevity of your lower back, and you'll really find it makes a huge difference. It might take a little bit of practice to start with, but learning to maintain a neutral spine, in spite of generating what can be quite a lot of force from your glutes as you get stronger, is going to really pay off dividends in the long term. This practice of doing a pelvic tuck when doing other exercises such as the squat is a mistake that we covered in a recent podcast episode. And it's the same here in the bridge. You don't want to do it. And if you want to learn a little bit more about why this movement, the pelvic tuck, should be eliminated from your training, especially if you're training for back health and longevity for the long term, then click the link in the description to watch the full episode. In this next section of the video, we're going to be focusing, for those of you that really struggle with back pain, or you've had a back injury, herniated discs, you've got some other long-standing sciatica perhaps, to make sure that you can use a variation of the bridge to help you build up some strength. We'll also cover some quick tips to make sure that you can do this in a way that doesn't give you pain, because for many people that we see, members of the program and patients, the marching bridge, which is one of the variations we'll be talking about, can sometimes result in a little bit of aggravation of back pain or sciatic symptoms. So we want to teach you it in a way that steers clear of those unnecessary aggravations. So we like to do the marching bridge as a variation here. And the way in which we do that is exactly the same starting position. So you lie on your back, you're in this position, knees bent, feet on the floor. You're going to engage your core and stiffen your torso by engaging the back muscles and then lift up. You don't need to lift quite as high here. And then all we're going to do is focus on having one leg planted on the ground and lifting the other. And then planting the other leg back down and lifting again. And planting back down and lifting. And the whole time you're doing this exercise, As you're doing your reps, nice and slow, you should be shifting your weight from one leg onto the other, engaging your glute and leg muscles with your core and trunk muscles to provide stability through one limb into the spine and then the other. There are a couple of finer training points to help you when it comes to doing the marching bridge in a way that builds back strength and integrity. The main errors that you're going to make on a bridge or a marching bridge is going to be, firstly, as you kick up into the bridging movement, you arch your back, and that narrows the little holes on the back of the spine here, pinching the nerves and creating aggravation. It's instability. The next one, as you're doing the marching bridge, is that your spine rotates one way or the other, and you get rotation coming through that lumbar spine, and that again can create problems. The final one is that you start in a position where your spine is flattened out. Cue that pelvic tuck that we just mentioned earlier on. And that creates a bit of weakness in this section of the lower back. It's not a good movement pattern, and it pre-stresses or stretches the structures on the back of the spine, including the back part of the disc, which you might have an injury in if we're talking about herniated discs or bulging discs. So the role of doing the marching bridge is to make sure that the spine stays stable and none of those bad movements creep in. So what that might look like when you're doing your bridges, these movement errors, is as you come up, you arch your back too much because you don't stabilize the spine, creating that aggravation down here in the lower back. It could be that as you're doing the marching bridge, your hips are going from one side to the other as if you're skiing, twisting that spine. Alternatively, like we mentioned on the pelvic tuck, it could be that you're flattening the spine too much, and that's stretching those disc fibers on the back part of the disc that have been herniated. So these little strategies are going to help you eliminate those. And the first one is don't go as high. Just lift your bum off the floor a fraction, and then we can focus on the action of shifting our weight from one side to the other. Number two is going to be don't lift the leg so high. There's no need to have your leg coming all the way up here when you're doing the marching bridge. Just bring yourself off the ground and ever so slightly lift one leg and then lift the other leg. The most important thing is in the leg that is bearing the load, not in the leg that is being lifted. To help with those errors, especially the rolling, when you're doing your marching bridge, it helps if you focus on planting this leg, engaging this hamstring and glute, pressing into the ground, and that makes the other leg go nice and light, so it's easier for you to lift it off the ground. Place it back down, plant through the other leg, and then lift. You'll find that pause to engage the one leg into the ground and into your core will help you lift the other leg without as much rotation and wobbling going through your spine. And marrying that strategy with a slightly lower lift of the pelvis will really help you learn to engage these glutes. Next, for some of you who really struggle with instability and you've lost a lot of muscle and have not very good control of your lower back, using a small towel can help you. It can help you learn where neutral is. So you're in this position with the towel just supporting underneath that natural curve. So when you lift off, you're lifting with your spine already in the right position. And then when you drop back down, you drop back into the correct position. This can make a huge difference for those of you that accidentally pelvic tuck as you go to lift, just because you've practiced it so much in the past. So try the towel if you really do struggle with your spine moving a little bit before you even initiate the movement. The final tip that can help you if you really are struggling to hold yourself steady is having your hands and placing them into the ground, pressing down, engaging your core, engaging your back muscles, and then lifting up. And this way, you get that extra layer of support as you're doing the marching bridge, and it can just help you stay that little bit more steady. And slowly over time, you can graduate to just using your elbows to support yourself and then having nothing there to support at all. Once you've got the technique down, whichever variation of the glute bridge that you're doing, you're ready to find the right resistance to actually build strength in those muscles. And that's where the next part of this video is going to help you. The very first step we can take, whether we're doing marching bridges or regular bridges, is to use a resistance band. And the resistance band can go just across your waist. And as you lift up, you can focus on lifting a little bit higher. Maybe you had to start out with one of the variations earlier where you weren't lifting your bum that far off the floor, but now we're using the resistance band. We've built strength so far, and we've built competence. So we can start to push it a little bit more, maintaining a neutral spine as we come up, using the resistance band to provide that extra stimulation of your glute muscles. There are some pros and cons to using the resistance band as a weight. Firstly, it's great because it's very, very light, so you don't have to twist around, especially if you've got a history of back pain. You can just pick it up, pop it over your waist, and you're good to go. The disadvantage with using resistance band is it does require upper body strength. And those of you that have maybe limited upper body strength at the moment might find it's quite difficult to hold the band in place once you move past a certain resistance. Your glute muscles are just going to be stronger than your upper body can bear to make this exercise effective. The next strategy is going to be using dumbbells or kettlebells. You can simply place these onto your waist and then crack on. Unlike the resistance band, you're going to find that putting these over your waist is going to be a little bit easier on your upper body. But unlike the resistance band, you're going to also find that it's a bit cumbersome as you start to need heavier weights to lift them off the floor and pop them onto your waist. And unless you've got a willing helper, you're going to find it difficult to go past a certain level without putting yourself in all sorts of difficult positions in order to get yourself in and out of the exercise. As effective as the exercise weight and choice might be for you, it can be too much of a risk or quirk to actually get in and out of that position with the weights that you need to build your glutes. One nice way to work around both of the limitations of the previous exercise variations, whether it's bands or whether it's using weights, is to do a single leg variation. This can mean that you either need a less cumbersome weight or your upper body weakness is less of a factor because you're only working against one glute rather than both of them together. So doing single leg bridges and actually doing the bridge up and back down with just one leg at a time can make this tons easier for you to continue to progress with limited equipment or access to weights. So how are we actually going to build strength? Well, it's important that we meet certain criteria. For those of you maybe recovering from a long-standing back injury, you might find that even the basic marching bridges are taxing enough on your glutes. And that means that those are going to actually adhere to strength building principles, i.e. you're not going to be able to do a full 10 reps, but you should aim or work towards being able to do 3, 4, or 5 sets of 10 on each leg or together so that you know that you're pushing the envelope. And that might be where you have to start. For others, you already have a degree of strength. Maybe you're coming to this as someone who's just trying to build strength in this area for the long term to reduce risk of back pain. And therefore, the next strategy is going to be a little bit more helpful for you. For those of you that are a little bit stronger, then you're going to use things like the bridges as a warm-up exercise or an activation exercise to awaken the area before you maybe go in and do some of the other exercises such as a squat. For example, if you're doing a 60-kilo squat or a 40-kilo squat in the gym with a barbell, then chances are doing some bridges on the floor aren't going to be that strength building for you, but they can be a great way for you to activate the area and warm it up. And there's another great tool that you can use as you fall into this department to really intensify that feeling of awakeness in those glutes before you get on to other exercises. You can use tools like a glute band to help activate and warm up the area by doing 2 or 3 sets of 10 reps of slow glute bridges as a warm-up ahead of something like a squat, a hip hinge, or a split squat, or even, as we'll discuss shortly, hip thrusters, to just get the blood into those muscles and make you more aware of activating those as you do your main strength building exercises. Why are strong participating glutes important if you've got lower back pain or sciatica, or for the long-term health of that area? Well, your glutes are massive muscles down here, which blend with some of the fascia in this region and then on into your lat muscles, which go up into the shoulder region to create this bracing support in conjunction with your core muscles and the lumbar erector spinae muscles such as QL, etc., to really create a strength in this area and then drive movements like the hip hinge when we're doing a hip hinge or deadlift, or when we're doing a squat, or when we're getting up and down off a chair in daily life. It's such a vital muscle to really activate, and one that quite frankly isn't used that often, as so many of us spend too much time sitting down all day with the hip flexed like this, that they very rarely get into that upright position. Unlike exercises like the squat and the deadlift, where as you come up to the top position with the hip actually in an extended position, we don't really have that much strain or challenge on the glutes because this is very efficient. When we're lying down like so, when we're doing the bridge, or as we'll get onto in a moment, the hip thruster, there is a lot of challenge, especially if we've got a weight on top of here, on those glute muscles, which makes this a really effective exercise to work that last part of hip extension, which is so important for lower back health and for hip health as well. And healthy, strong, flexible hips are a massive component of a strong, healthy lower back, no matter what the injury we've had in the past is. So with that out of the way, we're going to get into the last part of this video, and that's really a great exercise building on the bridge theme to build your glute strength for the long term. And that's going to be the hip thruster. And we're going to demo that for you right now. But this is used in all sort of spheres to really build your glutes effectively, and often, if not always, is done in combination with other exercises such as the squat and hip hinge, because as we've just mentioned, it targets those glutes in a slightly different way. It's way more effective. Plus, trying to do that same movement on a squat or a deadlift or hip hinge, you're only going to jar your back and create more trouble. We're going to do the variation set up in a gym. You can do this off the side of your sofa. You can do it off the side of a chair. As long as the chair is stable, I would advise putting it against a wall. But this is a great way for us to really scale the weights that we're using. So let's get it set up and show you how to do it. So when we're doing the hip thruster, we've got a couple of things, right? You can do this on a block like this, or you can do it on a bench, or you can do it on your sofa, for example, although you might not have a barbell to be able to do it there. You might use a dumbbell or a kettlebell variation instead. We want to use the bumper plates ideally. You might even want to use a little block to elevate them off the floor. That's going to be a bit more friendly for your back. You might also be able to see we've got the pad on here. It can be quite uncomfortable on the front of your hips, especially if you're lifting heavier weights. So using the pad can be there just for your comfort. So we've got that in place too. Obviously pop the collars on to make sure that your weights are nice and stable. And then all we're going to do is pop ourselves underneath here, like so. Get ourselves ready. Lean our middle back onto the block itself, and then we can walk our feet in and lift up like so. And now we've got the weight on, okay? And then all we're going to be doing is going to be lifting up and back down, up and back down, up and back down, up and back down, driving through the glutes, driving your feet into the ground, and keeping a nice engaged spine and core, not arching your back as you're doing these. The big problem with this exercise, for those of you with back pain, is it is a more advanced one. There are a couple of nuanced difficulties that are just not ideal for the lower back. So I'm going to cover a couple of those now to hopefully steer you clear of any aggravations, particularly if we've got any L5S1 or L45 disc injuries in the past that could potentially be aggravated from this exercise. Again, it goes without saying on this one, make sure your spine stays neutral. That's what you're working on, not allowing yourself to arch. As you're pushing up higher on these, it's going to be more tempting for you to arch your back. Make sure you keep everything strong and everything static. If you've laid the good foundation work on the previous bridges, then this should be much easier to keep everything tight so you don't aggravate anything in the lower back. Although this exercise is a really good one for building glute strength in a way that the other exercises really can't quite do, or at a range that they can't do, the obvious disadvantage is that you're having to sit in this long position and slide the weight in. And it's all too tempting. Maybe not when you're coming up. I can neutralize my spine, and then I can kind of walk myself in and I can lift up and get into a position nicely. But as you're coming out of the exercise, it's very difficult to keep your spine nice and neutral. As I'm here, it's all too easy for the spine to be pulled into a flexed position, and this can be really uncomfortable. And quite frankly, although the pad makes it more comfortable on your hips, it also means that it pushes your body down lower when you're finishing the exercise, leaving you in a more compromised position when it comes to the lower back. And that's where using options like some of the machines that are now in the high-end gyms or well-equipped gyms, not necessarily high-end, can really make this a lot more back-friendly than the traditional barbell option. If we're trying to be particularly mindful of past back injuries, one of the other things that we can do is use either a kettlebell or a dumbbell placed on our waist and do single leg hip thrusters. This is going to be much more challenging from a stability point of view, and you're going to find you need a fraction of the load to get the same challenge through those hip muscles and through the movement without needing to compromise your spine in ways we mentioned just a moment ago. So overall, much like the squat, the hip hinge and the split squat, the hip thruster can offer us a unique way to challenge that glute musculature in a position of extension in the hip, and really focusing on a range of motion that some of those others that I've just mentioned can't. And so it really does round everything off quite nicely when we're thinking about the most robust way to build strength and integrity in that hip region for the long term. Like all exercises, technique really matters. And hopefully wherever you are, whether you've got that history and you're recovering from a lower back injury, or whether you're just looking to use this exercise alongside others to build strength and resilience in your lower back, you're going to have some sort of help from this particular video. If you do have any questions, remember you can always use that comment section below. If you do know someone else who's struggling with their back pain, you can consider sharing this video with them. And as always, thanks so much for watching the video. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.